It's late November, time for food and gratitude. Who do you know that you owe a debt of gratitude to? I know I have a lot of people, and some of them I can't even give a proper thanks to. One of those is my father. Now, when my parents got together, my mom wanted 5 children, and my dad wanted 4 children. So they had 5, and then they had 4, and then they couldn't stop because, see, I was the ninth child, and 10 minutes after I was born, my twin sister was born. So they kept going until they had 14 children. Now, with 14 children, you need a lot of food. And my mother was usually the food maker. She was every day, day in, day out. She would make these huge vats of chili to serve a lot of people and knew how to do that. But my father, he was the specialty food person. So, for example, around this time of year, he'd make boiled custard. Now, if you don't know about that, it's kind of like eggnog, but it's cooked and it's rich and it's delicious. And one time I saw him putting it in the fridge, and on the top of the jar, he'd written 4X. And I said, Dad, what does the 4X stand for? He said, quadruple bypass. You see, this eggnog was full cream, full egg, full sugar, and it was delicious. And he also made ambrosia, which was grapefruit and orange and coconut. And it is the food of the gods. But the real food of the gods, the real sacred food that my father made, was ham and biscuits. Now, ham and biscuits requires 2 things: ham and biscuits. And he was really proficient at both. You see, now in Texas, we might call the national food barbecue. In Tennessee, where I grew up, we'd probably call country ham at least the state food, if not the nation of Tennessee. And country ham was my grandfather's specialty. He had earned more than one state champion smoked country ham award. So he knew how to make it, and it was so good. When you'd walk in the house and that ham was boiling or frying, oh, it filled the room, and it was just so wonderful. And that ham was so wonderful, so good, that when my grandfather died, my father was devoted to continue the tradition. And at my grandfather's house, where they had started the tradition, he kept it up for a couple of years. But after a while, my dad was an elementary school principal. He couldn't keep on that tradition because they had customers from all over the world. They sent hams to Philippines every year. But he knew he couldn't keep that up. He wanted to keep the tradition going, though. So he was going to do it much smaller one year. And so he turned a corner of our basement into a makeshift curing room and smokehouse. Now, I'm not sure what the conversations between my mom and my dad were when he decided that he was going to light some fire and have a slow, smoldering fire underneath the house where 16 people lived for 2.5 weeks to smoke the hams. But we did it. We'd staple this real thick black plastic up to the ceiling so everything would be contained. And the first day, there was smoke in the smokehouse, but nowhere else. The second day, there was a lovely light scent of hickory smoke just in the back part of the house. By the third day, the whole house smelled of smoke, and it continued to smell that way for months after the fire was put out. So we never did make ham in the house again, but at least we had enough for our family for a couple of years. Now, biscuits was where my father really excelled. You see, he'd grown up watching his grandmother make biscuits every day. There was no store-bought bread. And so every day she would make the biscuits. And as a toddler, he would watch her and observe, learning her skill. And my grandfather, who was later the ham maker, at this time, when my dad was just a child, he had a mill. And they milled all kinds of flour. And they even made a cereal called Sammy Boy cereal for my dad, Sam. So my father learned the traditions, but as an adult, he also experimented. So for one thing, he found out that lard, the traditional fat in biscuits, does not make as light and fluffy a biscuit as does shortening, vegetable fat. So he switched to using that. He also made a study of flours. So at that time, there were half a dozen small mills operating within a few hours of our house. And he would drive out to those mills and get the flour and come home and experiment. Those mills eventually closed, so he had to use commercial flour. And he found the best one. It's soft winter wheat. You have to use soft winter wheat. And he found the best commercial mill. But one time they changed their formulation. And he knew it immediately. He started a correspondence with them, telling them that they had changed the formulation. Please change it back. When they stopped, when they didn't, they never did, he wrote them a final letter telling them that he would no longer be their customer. But his biscuits would rise so high, and they had just a perfect little hinge where you could put a piece of that delicately smoked ham in there. And it was so, so delicious. And, I estimate conservatively that my father made at least 500,000 biscuits in his life. You see, when my mom would go to church and take a whole bunch of kids on Sunday morning, my dad, who wasn't really that religious, would stay home and do his own devotional, which was to make food for the family. It wasn't always biscuits. It was sometimes waffles or eggs or something like that. But it was at least once a month biscuits. And so everybody came home, and my dad had prepared food for the masses after the masses. Now, we have a lot of wannabe biscuit makers in our family, and I was one of them. I say wannabe because nobody could really touch the art of my father's biscuit making. Now, I went away to college, and, it was 1920. I thought I was pretty good. Now, I hadn't paid attention like my dad did to his grandmother, but I knew a little bit about it, and I thought, how hard can this be? So I got some all-purpose flour. No, don't use all-purpose flour. And I'd made bread before, so I got in there, and I started kneading the dough. And that is not a good idea with biscuits. See, this biscuit dough is light, and it needs a gentle touch, which I discovered. Now, my biscuits, the one and only time I made biscuits, they looked okay. I cut them out. I put them on the pan. I put them in the oven. I could smell them. Now, they didn't look like they were rising much, but the taste is really the thing, right? They were hockey pucks. I think I had one bite of one and threw the rest of them away. Now, this would have been a good time for me to pay attention and to call my dad and let him know how much I valued him and how much his biscuits meant to me. But I didn't. And I can imagine what he would have said, because it's what he said every time he answered the phone. Here's your mother. And he would hand the phone off to her. And just once, I wish that I would have said to him, Dad, hey, no, I want to talk to you. I want to let you know how special you are to me. But I never did. Now, Dad, at about age 80, almost 81, he developed pancreatic cancer. And it was bad. We knew it was bad. I went home to see him. He was in the hospital, and I fed him lime jello because for some reason he wasn't supposed to use his arms. And we had nice, polite conversation. That would have been a good time for me to tell him how much I appreciated him. And then came February 9th, his birthday. I was back in Houston by then, and I knew it was his birthday. And I planned to call him on his birthday. But I got busy. I don't know what I was paying attention to, but I didn't call him. And 6 days later, he died. Now, my dad is still teaching me from beyond the grave. Just last year, my sister told me about going to visit my parents one time, and next to the driveway, they'd put in a new watering system, and there was a spigot that was about a foot high, so you couldn't really see it when you were backing up in the car. She backed over it, and there was a big water fountain everywhere, and she ran in, all panicked. Dad, I hit the water, and it's going everywhere. And he said, well, I have a tool for that. I think it's in the basement. Come on, let's go look for it. So they were, and she was dancing behind him because she was all nervous. And he went down there and he said, it must be in the old part of the basement. So they went, and then she was telling him, Dad, come on, you got to hurry up. And he looked at her and said, it's water. It'll soak into the ground. I miss so much his slow, gentle wisdom. And I fed off of that without ever giving him proper gratitude, just like I was fed off of his ham and biscuits. So, Dad, if you're listening, thank you.